At first, it does not seem like a place at all. It feels weightless, almost imaginary, something that exists somewhere just beyond reach, like a thought you haven't quite finished thinking. You open a device, touch a screen, press a key, and suddenly you are there, or at least it feels like you are. But where is there? The internet, as we usually experience it, is quiet. It arrives without sound, without smell, without temperature. A page loads, a message appears, a video begins. There is no sense of distance traveled, no visible journey from one place to another. It feels immediate, almost as if nothing moved at all. And yet, something always does. Every time a page appears in front of you, something has crossed vast distances. Something has been requested, assembled, and delivered in fractions of a second. Invisible processes unfold beneath the surface, quietly coordinating, quietly responding, quietly sustaining the illusion that everything simply is. We rarely pause to notice this. Instead, the internet becomes a kind of background environment, not something we enter, but something that surrounds us. It hums gently behind daily life, woven into ordinary moments, checking the weather, sending a message, watching something as the evening settles in. It feels less like a tool and more like an extension, a continuation of thought itself. And perhaps that is why it feels so difficult to define, because the internet is not a single object. It is not a place in the traditional sense. It has no clear boundary where it begins or ends. It is not contained within your phone or your laptop, even though it appears there. It is not located in one city or one country or even one continent. Instead, it exists as a vast arrangement of connections, a quiet agreement between countless machines, each one speaking in small structured bursts of information, endlessly passing signals between one another. If you imagine it gently, you might picture a soft, glowing web stretching across the planet, threads of connection linking homes, offices, satellites, cables beneath oceans, each thread carrying tiny fragments of meaning. Not words as we hear them, but patterns, signals, encoded pulses of energy, shifting between states, like a silent language spoken at incredible speed. But even this image is only a simplification, because the internet is not still, it is constantly in motion, even when nothing appears to be happening. Even now, as you sit and listen, there are messages being sent, requests being made, data flowing in every direction. It does not sleep, it does not pause, it continues, quietly and endlessly, regardless of whether anyone is watching. And yet from the surface, it feels so simple. You type a word and results appear. You tap a name and a conversation opens. You press play and sound fills the room. Each action feels small, contained, almost effortless. There is no visible indication of the scale behind it, no sense of the vast systems quietly aligning to make these moments possible. It is like looking at the surface of a calm lake, unaware of the slow, intricate currents moving beneath. The deeper you begin to think about it, the stranger it becomes. Because unlike roads or buildings or physical spaces, the internet is made almost entirely of relationships. It is not defined by the machines themselves, but by how they are connected. A single computer, on its own, is not the internet. It becomes part of it only when it begins to communicate, when it reaches outward, when it responds, when it participates in the shared structure of exchange. And so, The internet is less like a place and more like a conversation that never truly ends. Every device connected to it is both a speaker and a listener, sending and receiving, asking and answering, contributing to something that is always in the process of becoming. There is no final version of the internet, no completed state. It is constantly updating, shifting, expanding, dissolving, and reforming itself. And yet, from our perspective, it often feels stable, familiar, predictable. You return to the same sites, the same platforms, the same digital spaces, and they greet you as if they have been waiting. There is a sense of continuity, of place, of memory, but beneath that familiarity, everything is slightly different each time. Data has changed, paths have shifted, systems have adapted in small, quiet ways. The internet remembers, but it also forgets. Pages disappear, links break, content is updated, replaced, or quietly removed. What feels permanent is often temporary. What feels solid is, in reality, constantly rearranging itself. And still, we trust it. We trust that when we reach out, something will answer, that when we search, something will be found, that when we send a message, it will arrive somewhere, to someone, even if we never see the path it takes. This trust is so deeply embedded that it becomes invisible. We no longer think about the distance between ourselves and others. The idea that a message might travel across oceans, through cables, between servers, across networks of networks, all within a blink, becomes something we accept without question. It feels natural, but it is anything but simple, because hidden within that simplicity is an extraordinary coordination of systems, agreements, and silent processes, all working together in delicate balance. If even one part shifts too far, if one connection breaks or one system fails, the illusion begins to fracture. Pages stop loading, messages fail to send. The quiet certainty of connection begins to feel uncertain. And in those moments, we glimpse something we usually overlook. We realize that the internet is not guaranteed. It is maintained, sustained, continuously held together by countless unseen forces, both human and machine, working in quiet cooperation. But for now, we remain at the surface, looking at the calm water, watching as information appears and disappears, as if by magic, as if from nowhere, as if the internet itself were a kind of invisible presence, always there, always ready, always waiting. And as we begin to drift a little deeper into this quiet system, we can start to ask a gentler question, not just what the internet is, but how it moves, how something so intangible can carry so much, so quickly, so reliably, across a world that is in every other way bound by distance. And slowly, almost without noticing, we begin to descend into the hidden mechanics beneath the surface. Beneath the stillness of the surface, there is movement, not loud, not visible, but constant, a soft, continuous motion that never fully stops, even in the quietest hours of the night. The internet, which once felt like a place, begins to reveal itself as a process, a sequence of small, precise actions unfolding again and again. To begin to notice it, you can imagine a single moment. You open a page, it feels like nothing more than a gesture, a light touch, a simple request. But in that moment, something leaves you, not physically, not in a way you can see, but as a signal, a question formed in code, sent outward into the network. It does not travel as words, it becomes something smaller, more structured, broken down into pieces that can move efficiently through the system. These pieces are often called packets, small bundles of information, each carrying just enough to find its way forward. And they do not travel together, they separate, scattering into the network, each one taking its own path. Some move quickly, others pause briefly along the way. They pass through routers, quiet machines that sit at the intersections of the network, gently directing traffic, deciding where each packet should go next. A router does not understand the meaning of what it carries. It does not read the message. It simply looks at the destination, compares it to what it knows, and forwards the packet along a path that seems most appropriate in that moment. And then another router does the same, and another. It is a process of constant, quiet decision making, a kind of distributed awareness, where no single point controls the whole, but each part contributes to the movement of everything. As the packets travel, they may pass through many places, through cables beneath streets, stretching between buildings, through long lines buried underground, connecting cities, through vast undersea cables, resting quietly on the ocean floor, linking continents across distances that once felt immeasurable. These cables are not still. Inside them, signals move as pulses of light, flickering on and off at incredible speeds, carrying information as patterns of brightness and absence. It is not unlike a quiet rhythm, a steady, almost musical sequence, repeating and evolving as data flows continuously through the system. In some places, the signal leaves the cable entirely. It becomes a wave, moving through the air, carried by radio frequencies between towers, satellites, and devices. It drifts invisibly through the space around you, passing through walls, through rooms, through the open air, unnoticed and unfelt. And yet it is always there. Every message, every image, every moment of connection is translated into this shifting language. Pulses, waves, fragments of encoded meaning, moving through systems designed to guide them without ever fully understanding them. Eventually, the packets begin to arrive, not all at once, not in order. They reach their destination scattered in time, each one carrying a small part of the whole, and somewhere, on a server, a machine, waiting quietly in a distant building, they are gathered again, reassembled, checked for completeness, arranged back into the form that was originally requested. A page, a message, a video, something that feels whole, even though it arrived in pieces. These servers are always waiting. In large, quiet buildings known as data centers, thousands of machines sit in rows, softly illuminated, cooled by steady streams of air. They store vast amounts of information, ready to respond when a request arrives. When you ask for something, they answer, sending data back through the network, retracing a path that may not be the same as the one that came before. Because the internet does not rely on a single route, it adapts. If one path is slow or unavailable, the packets find another way. They flow around obstacles, reroute themselves through different connections, adjusting continuously to the changing state of the network. It is not a fixed map, but a living system, always responding, always recalculating. And all of this happens almost instantly, faster than thought, faster than awareness, so fast that it disappears entirely from our perception, leaving behind only the result, the quiet appearance of information exactly when we expect it. But beneath that speed, there is complexity, layers of protocols, quiet agreements that define how information is structured, how it moves, how it is understood at each stage of the journey. Each layer handles a different part of the process. One ensures the data is broken into packets, another ensures it arrives intact, another defines how it is presented when it reaches you. These layers do not compete, they cooperate, each one performing a specific role, passing responsibility to the next, creating a system where countless independent parts align into something that feels unified. It is a kind of harmony, not perfect, not flawless, but remarkably consistent. And yet, it is fragile in subtle ways. A damaged cable beneath the ocean can disrupt entire regions. A server going offline can make something disappear. A small misconfiguration in a router can redirect traffic in unexpected ways. The system is resilient but not invulnerable. It depends on constant maintenance, constant attention, constant care. Still, most of the time, it works quietly, reliably, almost invisibly. And so, from where you sit, it feels simple. You ask, and something answers. You reach, and something returns. But now perhaps you can begin to sense the motion beneath that simplicity. The countless small movements, the endless exchange of signals, the silent cooperation of machines across vast distances. It is not magic, but it is intricate enough to feel like it. And as these hidden mechanics continue their quiet work, carrying pieces of meaning across the world and back again, something else begins to emerge. Because this system, this network of movement and exchange, does not exist on its own. It is used, shaped, filled with intention, and slowly, gently, we begin to notice the presence of those who move within it. At some point, almost without noticing, the internet stops feeling like a system and begins to feel like people, not all at once, and not in a way that is always obvious, but gradually, through small moments, it becomes clear that behind the signals, behind the packets, behind the endless motion of data, there is intention. Someone typed something, someone sent something, someone, somewhere, reached outward, just as you do. And so, the internet becomes something softer, something more familiar, a place where traces of human presence gather. You open a page, and what appears is not just information, it is a decision, a choice made by someone at some point in time to arrange words in a certain way, to share an image, to express a thought, to leave something behind for others to find. And these traces remain, not in the way physical objects remain, slowly wearing down with time, but in a different way. They persist as patterns, stored, copied, moved, and preserved across systems that quietly hold them in place. A message written once can be read thousands, millions of times, long after the moment of its creation has passed. It creates a kind of presence that is both immediate and distant. You can read something written years ago, and it feels as though it is happening now. You can send a message, and it arrives instantly, collapsing the sense of space between two people who may be separated by oceans. Distance begins to lose its weight, and time becomes more fluid, But within this ease, something more subtle begins to unfold. Because the internet does not just carry human expression, it reshapes it. When people communicate through the internet, their words are translated into the structure of the system. They become packets, signals, stored data, but they also adapt to the forms that the system allows. Messages become shorter, faster, sometimes more frequent, sometimes more fragmented. A thought that might have once taken time to form now appears almost instantly. A response that might have required reflection arrives in seconds, and so communication changes, not abruptly, but gradually. It becomes continuous, ongoing, less like a series of separate conversations, and more like a flowing stream where thoughts appear, overlap, and fade in and out of attention. There is always something being said, always something being shared, always another voice entering the space, and yet it can feel strangely quiet because despite the constant activity, each person experiences the internet from a single point of view: a screen, a feed, a conversation window, a carefully arranged slice of the whole, shaped by systems that decide what is shown, what is hidden, what is brought closer, and what is allowed to drift away. You are never seeing all of it. No one is. Instead, the internet presents itself differently to each person, adjusting subtly over time. It notices patterns, what you look at, what you pause on, what you return to, and it begins to respond, not with intention exactly, but with a kind of learned behavior, a quiet adaptation. It becomes, in a sense, reflective, showing you more of what you seem to notice, less of what you ignore, gently shaping the experience into something that feels familiar, even comfortable. And within this space, human presence becomes layered. You are not only interacting with others, but with representations of them, profiles, messages, images, fragments of identity arranged and presented through the structure of the system, each one real, but also curated, filtered, shaped in ways that are often subtle, sometimes intentional, sometimes not. A person becomes a collection of signals, a voice becomes text, a moment becomes something that can be paused, replayed, shared, and seen again long after it has passed. And still, connection happens. People find each other, speak to each other, share thoughts, feelings, ideas, and experiences across distances that once made such exchanges rare or impossible. A message can cross the world in less than a second, carrying with it something deeply human: a question, a greeting, a memory, a small expression of presence. I am here, and somewhere else, someone receives it. I see you. This quiet exchange repeats itself endlessly, billions of times each day, most of it unseen, unnoticed, part of the background rhythm of life. But if you pause for a moment and listen carefully, you might begin to sense it: a vast, continuous murmur of human activity layered over the silent mechanics of the network. It is not a single conversation, but many, overlapping, intersecting, diverging, some brief, some lasting for years, some deeply meaningful, others passing without leaving much trace at all. And yet all of them exist within the same system, moving through the same pathways, carried by the same signals, translated into the same underlying language of pulses and patterns. There is something quietly unifying about that. The idea that every message, no matter how small, travels through the same shared structure, that a simple greeting and a complex idea are both reduced to signals, carried side by side, without distinction, without preference. The system does not judge, it does not interpret meaning, it simply carries. And so, meaning emerges only when someone receives it, when a pattern becomes a word again, when a word becomes a thought, when a thought becomes something felt. This is where the internet becomes more than infrastructure. It becomes a space of experience, not physical, but real in a different way. A place where attention moves, where relationships form, where memory accumulates. A place shaped not only by technology, but by the countless individuals who pass through it, leaving behind traces of themselves in small, quiet ways. And over time, these traces begin to layer, building something larger than any one person intended. A shared environment made of contributions, interactions, and repeated patterns of behavior. It grows slowly, not in a straight line, but in many directions at once, expanding, shifting, reorganizing itself as more people enter, more messages are sent, more connections are formed. And yet, from the inside, it still feels personal. You open your screen, and it feels like your space, your messages, your feed, your experience, even though it is built from something vast, something shared by billions. It narrows itself into something that feels individual, contained, close. This quiet contrast remains at the center of the internet's human layer. Something infinitely large, experienced in a single small window, something shared by everyone, felt as something uniquely yours. And as this continues, as people move through the system, shaping it even as it shapes them, another layer begins to emerge, because this network of connection did not appear suddenly. It has a past, a gradual unfolding across time, shaped by earlier systems, earlier ideas, earlier attempts to connect across distance. And to understand what the internet has become, it helps to drift a little further back into the slower rhythm of how it began. If you follow the internet backward, gently, without rushing, it does not disappear all at once. It becomes simpler, quieter, less immediate. The smooth, seamless experience begins to dissolve into earlier forms, less refined, more deliberate, shaped by a time when connection was not yet constant and not yet expected. Long before the internet felt like an environment, it was an experiment, a question asked slowly over decades. How can something travel from one place to another without being physically carried? How can a signal move across distance and arrive intact? And so the story begins not with screens, but with wires, simple lines stretched between points, carrying electrical pulses that represented something else. At first, these pulses were basic, on, off, presence, absence, a rhythm that could be interpreted into meaning by those who knew how to listen. The telegraph, a system that allowed messages to move faster than any person could travel. A signal sent in one place, received almost instantly in another. It must have felt at the time like something quietly impossible, a message that did not need a messenger. Already, the idea was forming. That communication could be separated from physical movement. That meaning could travel on its own. As time passed, The signals became more complex. Voices joined the system. The telephone carried sound itself, allowing people not just to send messages, but to hear each other across distance. The sense of separation began to soften. Distance still existed, but it felt less absolute. And yet, these systems were still direct. One line, connecting one place to another, one path, one connection. They did not yet form a network in the way the internet does now. They were links, not webs. It would take time and a different way of thinking for that shift to occur. Gradually, the idea of connecting many points together began to emerge. Not just one-to-one communication, but many to many. A system where information could move through multiple paths, adapting, rerouting, finding its way, even if one connection failed. This was a quieter revolution, less visible, more conceptual. The development of packet switching, the idea that information could be broken into pieces, sent independently, and reassembled at the destination. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one. Instead of relying on a single continuous path, communication could become flexible, resilient, distributed. It no longer needed a fixed route, it could find its own way. From here, the early networks began to take shape. Small at first, experimental, universities, research institutions, groups of people exploring what it meant to connect machines together, to allow them to exchange information automatically. These systems were not yet public. They were quiet, almost hidden, used by those who understood their structure, who saw their potential. The connections were slower, less reliable, more fragile, but they worked, and each successful exchange, each message sent and received, reinforced the idea that something larger was possible. Over time, these isolated networks began to connect with one another. Carefully, gradually, agreements were formed, protocols established, ways of ensuring that different systems, built in different places, could still communicate. It required cooperation, a shared understanding, a willingness to align on how information should be structured, how it should move, how it should be interpreted. The network grew, not by force, but by consensus. And as it expanded, something new began to appear, a sense of continuity. Instead of separate systems, there was now a network of networks, a structure that could extend across regions, across countries, eventually across the entire world. It did not replace what came before, it layered on top of it, integrating older systems into a broader framework. The internet, as we begin to recognize it, slowly took form, but it was still different, still quieter, still less immediate than what we experience now. Access required intention, time, patience. Connections were established deliberately. Messages were sent with more awareness of their journey, more awareness of the system itself. There was a sense that you were interacting with something technical, something structured, something that required understanding. It had not yet faded into the background. It was still something you entered. And then, slowly, that began to change. Interfaces became simpler, systems became faster. The complexity of the underlying network was gradually hidden behind layers, designed for ease, for accessibility, for comfort. What once required knowledge began to require only presence, a simple act of opening, clicking, tapping. The internet became quieter, not because it was doing less, but because it was doing more, more efficiently. More seamlessly, it disappeared into the surface, and as it did, more people entered. What was once a small, specialized space became something shared by millions, then billions. Each new connection added to the system, not just technically, but culturally. New forms of expression emerged, new ways of communicating, of sharing, of existing within this space. The internet was no longer just infrastructure, it was becoming environment, a place where life unfolded, not instead of the physical world, but alongside it, intertwined with it, influencing it in ways that were often subtle, sometimes profound. And still, beneath all of this, the earlier layers remained. The cables, the signals, the protocols, the quiet ideas that made it possible. They did not disappear, they continued, unchanged in many ways, supporting the newer layers that formed above them. It is a structure built over time, not replaced, but accumulated, each generation of technology resting on the one before it, forming a kind of layered memory, a history that is still active, still present, still shaping what happens now. And if you listen closely, you can almost feel that history within the system, the slower pace of earlier connections, echoing faintly within the speed of modern exchange, the careful structure of early protocols, still guiding the flow of data, the original question, still present beneath everything that has been built on top of it. How can something travel across distance and arrive? Now, it happens so quickly that the question feels unnecessary. But once, it was everything. And as the internet continues to expand, continues to evolve, continues to absorb new layers of complexity and meaning, it carries that history with it, quietly, invisibly, shaping the paths that data follows, the way systems interact, the way people connect. It is not just a system of the present, it is a system of time, a continuous unfolding where past, present, and future exist together within the same structure, influencing one another in ways that are not always visible, but always present. And as we begin to sense this larger continuity, this vast layered construction built across decades, another perspective begins to open, because beyond individual messages, beyond individual connections, the internet begins to resemble something even larger, not just a network, but a kind of global system, a structure that moves information at a scale difficult to fully imagine. And slowly, gently, we begin to widen our view even further. As the perspective widens, the internet begins to lose its edges. It no longer feels like something you enter or something you use. It begins to feel like something that surrounds, not as a physical space, not as something you can step into or out of, but as a continuous field of activity stretching quietly across the entire planet. A system that does not belong to any single place and yet exists in many places at once. At this scale, individual actions become difficult to see. A message is sent, but it disappears into a vast flow of other messages. A page is loaded, but it is one of countless requests happening in the same moment. Each action still matters, still exists, but it becomes part of something larger, something continuous, like a drop of water entering a river. It does not vanish, but it becomes part of the movement, and the movement itself becomes the thing to notice. The internet, at this level, is not just a collection of connections, It is a system of constant exchange, information flowing in every direction, at every moment, across layers of infrastructure that quietly support its motion. It moves through cities, across oceans, between continents, forming patterns that are always shifting, always adapting, and yet it remains invisible. You cannot stand somewhere and see the internet passing by. You cannot watch it move in the way you might watch traffic or weather. It does not gather in a single place, and it does not follow a single path. It exists as distribution, as presence spread across many points at once. But if you imagine it gently, you might begin to sense its scale. Entire regions connected through dense webs of cables and signals, data centers quietly storing and redistributing vast amounts of information, satellites orbiting above, extending the reach of connection into places where physical lines cannot easily go. A layered system, both grounded and suspended, physical and abstract at the same time. And within this system, patterns begin to emerge. Not patterns of meaning, at least not in a human sense, but patterns of behavior, peaks and quiet moments, flows that increase and decrease with time of day, with activity, with global rhythms that are shaped by millions of individual choices happening at once. Morning in one part of the world, evening in another, work, rest, communication, entertainment, all contributing to the shifting balance of activity across the network. The internet does not sleep, but it does change. It breathes in a way, expanding and contracting in response to the habits of those who use it. And yet, no one directs this. There is no central point where the entire system is controlled, no single place where all decisions are made. Instead, it operates through coordination, through shared rules distributed across countless independent systems, each one making small local decisions that together create a global effect. It is a kind of emergence where the whole is not designed in detail but arises from the interaction of many parts. Each network connects to others. Each system follows protocols that allow it to communicate beyond itself. Agreements are maintained, updated, refined, not all at once, but gradually through cooperation and necessity. It is not perfectly ordered, but it is stable enough to continue. And within this stability, something interesting begins to happen. The internet starts to resemble other systems, natural systems. The flow of information begins to echo the flow of energy in ecosystems, the movement of signals in the human brain, the distribution of resources in complex environments, not identical, but similar in structure, networks within networks, nodes connected through pathways, signals moving, adapting, responding. It is not alive, but it behaves in ways that feel almost organic, growing, reorganizing, responding to change. When one part becomes overloaded, traffic shifts elsewhere. When a connection fails, others compensate. When new pathways are created, they are gradually integrated into the whole. It is not conscious, but it is responsive. And over time, it becomes increasingly complex, too complex for any one person to fully understand. Even those who build parts of the system, who design protocols, manage infrastructure, maintain networks, see only sections of the whole. They understand deeply within their domain, but the full structure, in its entirety, remains something larger than any individual perspective. It exists, but cannot be fully held in mind. And still, it continues, expanding not just in size, but in function, carrying more than messages, more than pages, more than media. It begins to support entire systems of activity, economies, education, communication, coordination, processes that depend on the constant, reliable movement of information across this global network. It becomes foundational, not in a visible way, but in a quiet, underlying sense. Many aspects of daily life begin to depend on it, often without being fully aware of that dependence. Systems rely on connection, services rely on data, decisions rely on information that flows through the network continuously. And because it is so consistent, so reliable, it fades further into the background. It becomes something expected, something assumed, until perhaps it stops. And in those rare moments, when connection is interrupted, when the flow pauses or breaks, the absence becomes noticeable. The silence reveals the presence that was always there. The stillness reveals the motion that had been constant. And then, when it returns, it feels as though something has resumed, as though the world has quietly started moving again. This is the scale at which the internet now exists, not as a tool, but as a condition, a state of connection that surrounds and supports countless interactions, most of them unseen, most of them unnoticed, but all of them part of the same vast system. And within that system, everything continues. Messages move, signals shift, patterns form and dissolve, connections appear and disappear, all without pause, without rest, without a single moment where the system is truly still. It is always becoming, always in motion, and yet from where you sit, it still feels simple. A screen, a moment, a quiet interaction, something small, connected to something vast. And as this awareness settles, as the scale of the system becomes just slightly more visible, there is one final layer to drift into. Not another mechanism, not another structure, but a reflection, a gentle return to the surface, carrying with it everything that has been quietly unfolding beneath. And so, slowly, without urgency, we begin to rise again, not away from the internet, because there is no clear place outside of it anymore, but back toward the way it first appeared, back to the surface where everything felt simple, immediate, almost effortless. A screen, a quiet glow, a moment of interaction that asks very little and gives something in return. But now, something has shifted. The surface is still calm, but it no longer feels empty, because beneath each small action, there is a quiet awareness of everything that supports it. The signals moving, the systems coordinating, the history layered beneath, the countless people whose presence fills the network in ways both visible and unseen. And yet, the experience remains gentle. You open a page and it appears. You send a message and it arrives. Nothing about that has changed. The internet still presents itself as something simple, something close, something immediate. It does not ask you to think about cables beneath oceans or machines in distant buildings. It does not require you to consider the paths your data travels or the systems that guide it. It allows you to forget, and perhaps that is part of its design. Not intentional in a human sense, but natural in the way complex systems often become invisible when they function well. The more seamless something becomes, the less we notice it. The more reliable it is, the more we begin to treat it as a constant, something that simply exists without question, like air, like light, like time itself. But unlike those things, the internet is something we have made, not all at once, not by any one person, but gradually, collectively, across years of quiet effort. It is built from decisions, from agreements, from countless small contributions that have layered into something vast and continuous. And still, it does not feel like a construction. It feels like an environment, a place where thought moves easily, where presence can extend beyond the physical limits of the body, where moments can be shared, stored, revisited, a place that exists not in space exactly, but across it. And within this environment, we move without thinking. We reach for it in small pauses throughout the day, in moments of curiosity, of boredom, of connection. It fills the spaces between activities, becoming part of the rhythm of life so naturally that it is difficult to imagine those spaces without it. A question arises, and we search, a thought forms, and we share. A moment feels quiet, and we fill it. These actions repeat gently, continuously, forming patterns that are as much a part of daily life as any physical routine, and over time they begin to shape the way we experience the world, the way we relate to others, the way we understand distance, time, and presence. But even as it shapes us, we shape it. Every interaction leaves a trace. Every message adds to the flow. Every moment of attention contributes to the shifting patterns of the network. The internet is not fixed, it is responsive. It reflects the activity within it, the choices made by those who move through it. It grows in the direction of use, adapting quietly to the habits that emerge over time. It is both structure and reflection, both system and mirror. And perhaps this is where it becomes most difficult to define, because it is not only a network of machines, it is not only a system of communication, it is also a space of human presence, layered and distributed, continuous and evolving, a place where fragments of thought, expression, and experience accumulate, forming something that is always changing, yet always familiar, something that feels external, and yet deeply connected to the way we think. And so, as we return to the surface, the question from the beginning begins to echo again. Where is the internet? It is not in the screen, though it appears there. It is not in any single place, though it exists everywhere. It is not a thing you can point to, or hold, or fully step into, and yet it is always close, always within reach. Perhaps it exists in the space between things, between machines, between signals, between people, a continuous exchange, a quiet flow that connects moments across distance, carrying pieces of meaning from one place to another, again and again, without pause. And as you sit here, in this moment, listening, the internet continues, messages move, signals pass, connections form and dissolve. Somewhere, someone is sending something. Somewhere else, someone is receiving it. And in between, the system carries it, just as it always has, quietly, reliably, without asking to be seen. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply continues. And you, like everyone else, move through it in small, gentle ways, opening, closing, sending, receiving, participating in something vast while experiencing it as something small, a single moment, a single screen, a single connection. And from here, it looks just as it did at the beginning, calm, simple, almost still, like the surface of a quiet lake, reflecting whatever appears above it, while beneath, the motion continues, unseen, uninterrupted, endlessly unfolding. And if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with a softer kind of awareness, you can almost feel it, the quiet hum of connection, the gentle movement of information, the presence of something vast held within something small, and then, slowly, without needing to hold on to it, you can let it fade back into the background, right where it has always been.